Welcome to Hampton 3 Gallery. It's Saturday, September the 10th, and we're gathered here for coffee and conversation. And our conversation this morning is about Corrie McCallum. And we're going to discuss her life and her works and share some stories with you today. So we look forward to that. And the first person I would like to introduce is Sarah Tigner, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Johnson Collection. And we are having this exhibition here today partially because of the initiation of the Johnson collections and their interest in Corrie. Now, we've represented Corrie's work for many, many years, but the Johnson collection has a mission, and they have a vision. And so I'm going to let Sarah take over, and she's going to talk a little bit about her role and the role of the Johnson collection and how they got involved with Corrie McCallum's work. Thank you, Sarah, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. And this is a delightful audience. This is really exciting to be able to share not only Corrie's work, but also the Johnson Collection. As Sandy said, our mission to showcase, to contextualize, and share art of the American South. And the family, the Johnson family, George and Susie Johnson, and we're based in Spartanburg, South Carolina. They really began collecting through what everyone normally has, is just a love of visual culture that reminds you of home. And George and Susu are from this region. George is from Spartanburg. Susu is from Morganton, North Carolina. So their first collecting was really strongly focused on images of home. And I think that we'll kind of turn that back to think about how Corrie herself reflected on her travels, but also her strong connection to South Carolina and Charleston. And so there's a personal connection to Corrie's work as well that the Johnson family has. And through the collecting, it started in 2002, and then the collection formalized as a belief that not only can you have a collection of Southern art to enjoy personally, but there is a goal that the family strongly started dedicating to in 2006, that this artwork that they had amassed, about 400 paintings in 2006, could do more than just be enjoyed personally. And we started thinking about the educational component, sharing it with regional educational institutions like Converse University, Wofford College, and then a lending program. Here we are in our region. We appreciate Southern art. I mean, Hampton 3 Gallery has been doing this for so many years, getting people to recognize that there are some amazing artists in our region. And so for the Johnson Collection, it occurred to us that we need to get this art outside of our region as well. We do have an appreciation for it, and we'll continue to share it here in Spartanburg, here in the upstate. With the Gibbs Museum, we have a great, strong connection there. But really, it's a loan program that we have formalized within the last about 10 years to make sure that these artists that we all love, that the family loves, that the staff members love, are also getting viewed in the broader context of American art. And so that's kind of our background. And we now have over 1,300 works of art, ranging in date from 1760 to the present day. We do have a few living artists in the collection. We have Enid and Paul, actually, who are here. And so there is an ongoing goal that we have to collect and to continue to share art of the American South. So why Corrie?
Before you start into Corrie, Sarah, I'm brag a little bit because I'm going to instigate this. Where are some of your paintings right now?
Sure. Yeah,
just explain your influence.
We've got some great, a great lending program right now, and it's a good problem to have. We actually are feeling, we're struggling sometimes finding for our Spartanburg locations that we have art on public display. And I should also say we have about 60% of that collection. So I said 1,300 pieces. 60% of that is on public display at all time. So we might be organized as a private collection, but truly the family is dedicated to having this art on public display. Right now, our biggest loan is Lois Mailou Jones Africa, which is actually in Venice at the Venice Biennale right now. That's been there since April. And they were looking at women artists, marginalized artists for this year's Biennale, and reached out to us to borrow Lois Mailou Jones, who is a mid-century Black woman artist, touching on African themes and what it was like to be an artist in the United States influenced by the African diaspora. So a very international conversation that here we have a Southern artist is participating in that. Right now at TJC Gallery, which is our downtown Spartanburg exhibition space, we have Alice Ravenel Hughie Smith, some wonderful watercolors that actually were featured in the film Where the Crawdads Sing. So when the movie's director was doing visual organization, thinking about how she was going to show the swamps of North Carolina, she located Alice Smith, reached out to us, and asked to borrow images of Alice Smith's work. So you'll see those watercolors in the film as the character Ma's work of art. So we've got those up in our gallery. And it's really for us also touched on, that's a great invitation for people who might not be familiar with art, who know how to engage with art. But we've got a lot of people love movies, who love blockbusters, who love this book that's been on the New York Times bestseller. So truly, that's a great resource and access point for us to allow our audience to come in and learn about this fantastic. I mean, Alice Smith, her watercolors are astounding, and that's just a wonderful way for us to share on that national platform.
And I think LA, don't you have something in Los Angeles?
We've had 3 of our paintings are in the Afro-Atlantic Historias, and that's a National Gallery and Houston Museum of Art's exhibition that's traveling to LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And we've got a William Walker is there in that exhibition, a Hayward Oubre, who's a North Carolina artist, as well as, here I'm thinking about the third, we can come back to that. Yes, I really should know that.
Absolutely, that's fine.
Lois Mailou Jones was one of the artists, and we actually removed it from that show to send her to Italy. So we're dancing with a lot of fun partners right now.
But I think this is an interesting time to point out that art and promotion of art and enjoyment of art is a collaboration from a lot of different viewpoints. Yeah. Artists that we represent and that other galleries represent, I mean, you want their work to be seen by the public. Yeah. You've got to have collections and collectors and museums that are collecting so the public can come in and have this dialogue with their works. It's not just a lone organization.
Right.
And I think that's what you all do so well is that you're getting it out there, and particularly focusing on Southern art, which has been overlooked for so long.
It's been overlooked.
I mean, truly, and it still is, to be honest.
It is. But we are, I mean, again, that good problem that we have is our amount of loans that are getting requested to go out. It's becoming more and more that large American art museums, whether it's the Whitney in New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, who has a fantastic curator who used to be at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. They're starting to pay attention to diverse voices. So not necessarily just a diversity of race, which is so important, but also diverse voices that more, I think, mirror those that are coming to museums. And that's what's really important, I think, is to make sure we're showing our audience a reflection of what you yourself identify with.
And you brought these curators to Spartanburg.
I did, yeah.
And you have introduced them as well as given us in the upstate an opportunity to interact and for them to see what's going on.
Yeah, with some public programming. That's really, so that educational side. We can put exhibitions on, we can say, hey, come and look at this artwork, but there's a foundation of knowledge that we also find is so important to share. And it's not just our knowledge. There's certainly some scholars in the room right now who we have relied on very heavily for getting that foundation of knowledge to basically be a pillar to stand up the visual art. There's an important research and scholarly conversation that's necessary. And Martha Severance is here, and there have been a number of our publications. So we put together exhibitions, but we also have scholarly volumes to go along as catalogs through the research that goes on when designing an exhibition, it first was put together as a volume, a publication, multiple essays, talking about where does Southern art lie in the conversation of art history. And Martha has been a huge voice for the Johnson Collection with her background, and really is one of the primary curators of Southern art. We knew who to call when we needed. We can curate in-house here and there, but for that deep dive into Southern art scholarship, there are some wonderful scholars in our region. So we called Martha, and she worked on Scenic Impressions, so our Impressionist volume, looking at that in 2014. Eugene Thomason's volume, From New York to Nebo. We're the largest holders of Eugene Thomason's work. We have 62 of his paintings. So we put a great monograph together. And then we did, near and dear to, I think, all of our hearts, Central to Their Lives, Southern Women Artists from the Johnson Collection. That's been our most recent volume. And that did feature Corrie. I feel like I need to talk about Corrie now.
We are going to segue into Corrie very quickly. But before we leave the Johnson, how do people get in touch, or how do they find out what's going on with the Johnson Collection?
Wonderful. Well, so talking about all of that material that we've got the paintings, we've got research connected to the works of art and the artists. Oh, this slipped in. We've got a great website, thejohnsoncollection.org, and that has for us all of that information that is publicly accessible, and there's wonderful images. So if you can't get to our location, or it's heavily used by us to talk to museums, to let them know visually what we have. I was just meeting with curator Stephanie Height from the High Museum, and she was talking about, it's the image. No matter if you're an American art historian, you still are visually based. And so coming to our website and looking at our collection as it is visually is a great resource. But on our main page, we've got all of our programming, all of our information about our gallery space. We rotate our exhibitions in-house every 3 months at TJC Gallery. Our Alice Smith exhibition is up right now. Next show will be on portraiture, which will be fun, talking about how portraits are not just snapshots of an individual, but there's stories behind portraits. So we'll be digging in that. And then right now, a great show that's at Wofford College is McCallum and Halsey at Home and Abroad. So we have, and in 2006, the family became very interested in William Halsey's work through a wonderful sale of Halsey paintings that were collected by Tom Cooper, who was a neighbor for a number of years of Halsey, who was a lover of Halsey's work and had collected throughout his adult life. I actually think Tom Cooper started collecting as a teenager, and so this capsule of someone who knew Halsey so intimately. When that was sold in 2006, the Johnson Collection purchased about 30 works of art from that sale, and that was the Charleston Renaissance Gallery who put that on. And gorgeous catalog connected to that. And the family, that was their first foray into abstract modernism. They had been collecting landscapes, history paintings, things that a lot of people start collecting for the most part are works of art that can very quickly visually remind you of something. I think some collectors, it takes a little bit of time to kind of dabble in that modernism, to start thinking about abstractionism. And it was Halsey that got the family really into thinking about that expression on canvas, which can be so lively. And that Tom Cooper collection was stunning. So we purchased that, and Halsey then started us looking at modernism in the South. So that was a real strong, from 2006 to about 2012, that was a really strong acquisition, I think, direction we went in. Black Mountain College was an area where we strongly thought about and researched and collected. You can see our Black Mountain College collection at the AC Hotel in downtown Spartanburg. We've got a Ruth Asawa, a Robert Rauschenberg, all of these amazing American art voices that are also Southern art voices, because Black Mountain College was in tiny rural Black Mountain, North Carolina. So for us, that's a great way of saying, well, what is American art? What is Southern art? Let's talk about how they're one and the same. and they're pretty fundamental to what we know of modernism in our country. That's, Black Mountain, internationally, actually. So that we had 2006, we had William Halsey. And so this is, the Johnson Collection this spring purchased 22 of Corrie McCallum's paintings. And what I wanted to talk about today is the why. And some of that was a little bit of a poke. And it was Corrie McCallum's daughter, Louise Halsey, who called me one day. And I had met her. This is a beautiful story that I'm just going to sidebar and talk about. I'm from California, so I've lived in the South for 18 years now, but I'm originally from the West Coast. My father was from Kentucky, and in 2006, I moved here to South Carolina. My father and mother had returned to Owensboro, Kentucky. And I started doing research on William Halsey. I found that Halsey had a daughter who lived in Kentucky, and I said, oh, yes, I'll visit the daughter and I'll visit my parents as well. This is wonderful. And then I found out Louise lived in Owensboro, Kentucky, and I said, whoa, okay, that's where my parents live. This is getting better. She lived across the street from my parents. So I have a very dear kind of connection to Louise, and just that small world, that really crazy small world kismet experience. And so I was able to visit my parents and see Louise's collection of Halsey and McCallum's work. But she called me in January of this year and said, I'm on your website, and I adore your book, Central to Their Lives, looking at Southern women artists. I know you have my mother's work. And on your website, there's only 2 paintings by Corrie. And on your website, there's 30 paintings by Halsey. Why?
Now, let's explain that William Halsey and Corrie McCallum were married.
Yes.
So,
Thank you.
So they,
context.
Right. And so, and many will say that Corrie was overshadowed by William a lot, even when they were in Charleston, both of them painting.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, and Louise knew that. I mean, and she grew up intimately with, I'm not familiar if there was tension, but just that word overshadowed. Louise, as a practicing artist, she's a fiber artist, beautiful fiber artist, is aware of that natural tension that had to happen by having 2 artists working in the same house. And I'm looking at Enid and Paul and wondering, how that happens. But yeah, there's a natural, and I think maybe a push for each person's, career is to use each other as a nice way of pushing each other to keep on practicing. But we're talking in, mid 20th century. How did that impact Corrie? And I think we felt very strongly, we had this exhibition, Central to Their Lives. We had a catalog, a gorgeous, 7 lead essay, 44 women artist highlight of how it was so difficult to be a woman working in the South and wanting to be a professional artist, to be taken seriously, not as a hobbyist, but saying, I am producing a body of work, I am exhibiting this body of work, I am selling this body of work, and it should be taken seriously. So that was our volume of Central to Their Lives. We believed strongly in highlighting what women were doing, starting in, that volume started, I think our earliest start 1860 in that piece, maybe not. So early 20th century, and then we kind of ended the conversation in 1960. Corrie is one of those voices in the catalog. And yet, just due to circumstances that the Tom Cooper collection in 2006, when the family was still, they didn't have a fine arts staff here at the Johnson Collection at the time in 2006. So that acquisition of Tom Cooper was a great opportunity to collect William Halsey's work. We didn't really think about how that looked. What are the optics of collecting one artist but not the other? And really Louise, she gave me a poke, and a rightful poke, and I appreciated that poke. So what I did was, and I knew Louise had some artwork, but I also knew that there are 3 children that manage their artist estate, and that's Paige, Louise, and Paige, David, Louise by age. And so at that point, I felt like this is serious. I feel a strong now mission to showcase Corrie McCallum's work as much as we've ever showcased William Halsey's work, but to show her as Corrie McCallum. That's what I wanted to really focus on, her body of work, not as it played out in connection to Halsey, but Corrie McCallum's body of work, and pay attention to her early pieces. And so I reached out to Sandy, knowing that Sandy had a familiarity with the family, with understanding Corrie's work. It just made sense for us to partner in a way. And Sandy did so much effort and organization and research in helping us kind of gather through the estate, so through the 3 children that are taking care of their parents' art. It was Sandy who did so much of gathering and presenting and saying, okay, here's what the family has. And then she and I would have great conversations of, okay, what speaks to Corrie's early pieces, making sure that Corrie was an experimenter. When it came to her printmaking, she was willing to push so many more boundaries in her region, and then as an educator for that. So we wanted to make sure we had a nice sampling of her prints, whether it was lina cuts or her woodblock. I mean, and we've got one of my favorites is it's a rice harvester, and it is a huge woodblock print, and I'm using my hands to show, but maybe I should, because this is being recorded, talk about how large it is. It's most like, I think it's about height-wise about 22 inches and probably about 20 inches wide. So we're talking a wood block print. I mean, that's gutsy to work with a block of wood, carve it, and on this delicate rice paper. I mean, her technical skill was something that we wanted to showcase and share with our audience. And we have a really nice overview of printmaking in the South, and Corrie was a very strong voice that we hadn't had until this year. And it's not, I feel like I'm beating ourselves up sometimes, and sometimes it's just opportunity. And it was a great time for us to spend research, digging in to a single artist's kind of oeuvre, what she did early on and then what she did later in her life.
Well, and this is a good point of what a collection or a museum can do. They bring an artist's work that hasn't had a whole lot of attention, bring it back up into focus.
Right.
Now, that's not saying that she hasn't been exposed before this.
Right.
I mean,
right.
the Gibbs Museum, and we're going to segue to Martha here in just a second, because there was a book that was written by the Greenville, or published by the Greenville Museum of Art. And I just read this last night, Martha, your essay. You put it together in a way that I felt was so concise and so understandable. So the book called Corrie McCallum, Take Note, and we have here Mary McCarthy, who also helped to work on this. She was employed by the Greenville Museum of Art, too. So, Martha, if you can come up and just take a few minutes to comment. You knew Corrie. In fact, you were at the Gibbs Museum in Charleston, and so you knew Corrie and William well. And so I'm not sure what you're going to say, but approach your connection with all of this.
Okay, but let me start about your comment about the book. I also just reread my essay the last 2 days, and I felt badly that a lot of what I covered was William, that I did a lot of playing the two of them off because that's how I knew them. And I knew them beginning in 1976 when I moved to Charleston. My husband took a position at the College of Charleston. Both Corrie and Bill were teaching at the college then. And I will share one memorable evening I had with them. They lived in a rented single house on State Street. And a single house is that traditional Charleston architecture with a great two-story piazza porch. And we were invited over to come after dinner because there was going to be a night blooming cereus plant. I know some of you are shaking your head. And so this was the magic moment. And fortunately, the Blooms cooperated, and we enjoyed the fellowship. But I certainly would agree with the word overshadowed. And Corrie felt it deeply, that William, who was a forceful personality, and at times, no doubt, hard to live with. And I also had the pleasure at the Greenville Museum of doing an exhibition on his work. The sad thing was he actually, I was working on him, interviewing him, writing an essay, and then before the show took place, he passed away. So that's happened to me a couple of times. I don't know if it's the curse of death that I bring to artists or whatever. So with Corrie, it was only appropriate that we follow up with an exhibition. The catalogs are matched set in terms of size and length, and I think nicely done in that respect. This issue of overshadowed, I think to commend Corrie, I would say she was smart and calculated, maybe one could say that, in choosing her own pathway. She became, as Sarah said, a very talented and proficient printmaker. And that was something that William Halsey had no interest in whatsoever. He did a few prints, I think, early on, but really he had moved on into collages. I don't think she ever, or rarely did a collage. He was moving into sculpture, so he was moving in one direction, and she very purposely went in another. And I would also say in terms of palette, she made her mark, as you can see here in this gallery, with color. It was all for her about expressing herself in color. And you've got a wonderful series examples of, I think, her favorite color, which is this sort of turquoisey blue. And I think it was also the color that I remember her wearing a lot. And you can see in the photograph in the catalog and other photographs of her that it was something that she not only painted with, but also wore on her own body. So I don't know if you want me to say much more, Sandy, but it is one of those things. I mean, I think of other couples, Lee Krasner and Jackson Pollock, Elaine and Willem de Kooning, Georgia O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz. There's that tension, but also I think there's I don't like the expression, but I'm going to use it anyway, kind of feeding off of one another. That there's a playing, against and then away. And I think the strength of Corrie's work was when she went away and did her own thing and moved in different directions.
And hopefully we're going to get to some of that with her travel.
Yes.
Before we close today. But let me ask Anne if she would step up for just a minute. And Ann Hicks was our art critic and writer at the Greenville News for over a decade, wasn't it, Ann?
Yes.
And I will say, and this is just my personal view, there was no one that was more passionate and committed to covering the arts than Ann Hicks. And I think today Greenville has a thriving art community largely because Ann Hicks was out there constantly getting the notice to everybody what was going on. Unfortunately, we don't have that today in the same way, but we owe a lot to Ann. And so Ann would interview these artists, and she interviewed Corrie. And so, Ann, you want to just make a few comments? I just reread your article also recently.
Yeah. I came to work for the Greenville News in 1999. So when I met Corrie, this was in her WOW period, and of course she was widowed and very much on her own. And speaking of the Johnson collection and knowing Susie, a very strong woman's right advocate, I thought about Corrie and meeting Corrie. Corrie was a strong woman, and you knew it right off when you met her. You were in her presence, a strong person, and had a wonderful chat with her, which didn't make any stories, but she spoke about traveling and the freedom and leaving the kids behind. And I so appreciated it. I was a strong feminist, oftentimes finding myself dispirited over the reaction people had over leaving my children and doing my thing. It is, so I really connected with her at that level. And she spoke of feeling that she was overshadowed, that there was a time in her life when, well, she didn't mind motherhood. In fact, she deeply embraced it. The fact was that, as we find with Serena Williams, as we find with other women, the fact that you also supporting the family, you're in fact the foundation of that family, will interfere with your artistic desire to produce. I mean, the creative spark and the fire that results from it is there, and yet you having to, well, sort of mitigate it, if you will, or push it back. I will take an hour, I will take 2 hours, but there he is all day long in that sunlit studio. So, and y'all can certainly cut all that out if you want to, Jake. But I'm just, so that's the woman I met and I knew and appreciated greatly, and she inspired me to write about her. And certainly reading Martha Severan's essay, which I read this morning, about 9:15, and what a wonderful, wonderful essay that is, and portraying her. And I very much appreciated also Martha's comment about sort of equalizing, not her term, but mine, those two greatly talented artists right here in South Carolina, and we're proud of both of them. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Anne. And we're going to go back to the book that Martha wrote the essay for, because the title is Take Note. And so for the last few minutes that we have, we're going to take note of the paintings, and we're going to talk about the work. We've talked about the woman, and we've talked about the overall issue of women not being recognized like men were, but that's starting to come to the forefront.
Sandy, can I make a comment?
Go ahead.
So the Johnson Collection recognized when we were writing Central to Their Lives, I have an art history undergraduate degree, and so the language of speaking about artists is something that we have a vocabulary, but it occurred to us, and Martha, I don't know if you remember this conversation, we would refer to the women artists by their first name. And there is, we're here, and there are a few who knew Corrie, so saying Corrie makes sense to have that friendship, but we kept on finding that women artists we were more friendly with, and male artists we were saying their last names. And it was just something that I'm Susie Johnson, a very strong, powerful feminist, very similar. I love working for the Johnsons because of Susu. I was feeling so down that what is it about our scholarly approach that was having us refer to women by their first names and not men, or why? And so that's been a conscious effort. It's easier to say Corrie, I think, because there's that strong C, but I'm always reminding myself to say McCallum. And there's a higher seriousness to recognizing someone by their last name that I think, whether it's in art criticism, and so that McCallum is something that I'm trying to remind myself, because I say Halsey, I don't say William. And it's intriguing, that just, again, that tension that we're finding and trying to address. And I'm hoping the more that we research and talk about maybe male artists referring to their family more, because you can't not refer to a woman's family. Like we're saying, there's a foundation that a woman has in caretaking, perhaps, but maybe it will help us equalize the genders if we also refer to a man's family life more in our scholarship, to remind people that both of men and women have a home life that absolutely, by necessity, affects their professional life as well.
Exactly. All right. So William and Corrie painted together, lived together for over 60 years, and they did influence each other. Now, Martha, you were talking about collage. There's collages right now here in this room that Corrie did. So, and you just kind of wonder if there wasn't some synergy of what Corrie was doing that William wanted to explore too. This is my personal opinion, but Corrie's work is more whimsical. It's more free. I don't want to dismiss it by saying it was childlike, but there was just a freedom and a joy in the way she painted. She painted for the sake of painting. She loved it. I think William, we don't need to keep going back to William, but I think he was more cerebral in the way he approached his work. So the joy of painting was something that Corrie did all of her life, even with the family. I mean, she got a full scholarship to the Boston Museum of Fine Art to study there. When she was at University of South Carolina, her teachers recognized her and made her the assistant and everything. Strong artist, and that's what attracted the two of them together also. So she could paint. She could draw. She could do classical work. But she chose a different path. And so freedom, I think that's what she was looking for in her life and in her works. She was able in the 60s, I think it was 68, the Hughes Foundation gave her a grant, and she was able to travel the world. That changed her life. Now, I will say
and she was solo. She was solo traveling
correct.
The world.
But she actually didn't go until the children were out of high school. So children were important to her, those children. And I think that influenced her work, too, the way she expressed herself. She traveled to third world countries, Bali, India, Cambodia. She said when she saw, and I won't say it right,
Angkor Wat,
that the whole trip was worth it, she said, to see that tremendous monument and it being overrun by vegetation.
And I think, there was a strong, I think, she took some chances traveling as a woman in the late 60s solo, but I also think she took chances artistically. If we think about during that time, and Halsey was interested in abstract expressionists and these large canvases and these gorgeous materials, Corrie was reflecting her travels on her canvases, which was not necessarily what the art world and the art market was interested in. We had this gutsy, let's get these big canvases, this machismo being shown on walls. And yet Corrie, I think, took chances by saying, this is what I personally want to convey. Her travel journals and then coming back to Charleston and doing larger than finished oils about her world that she experienced. Knowing that, I don't know, and Martha, you might have a larger overview of this. In the late 60s and early 70s, is that what people were collecting? And she didn't care. She wanted to express her travels on canvas. What do you think,
They had
Martha?
gone through the Charleston Renaissance, which was doing a lot of the Charleston scenes.
Right.
And then she really, her travel really pulled her into printmaking even more. And she really established herself as a printmaker in exploring these exotic images. And so many of them were women working in the field, in the marketplace, pounding grain. So,
and we saw one of the first paintings Sandy introduced to the Johnson collection is Rice Fields Bali. And it's a huge, beautiful, deep blues and greens, Bali rice stacked, that tiered rice cultivation. And my first thought was, how that connects to art of the American South and art of our region, that we are so familiar with rice cultivation and how the history of that in South Carolina is so strong. And Corrie was drawn to that on the other side of the world, and how beautiful it is for us to address the similarities of a region that's so far, and how rice has impacted Bali and how rice has impacted South Carolina. It's a beautiful work of art to think about how much it touches, even though it's not a Southern scene. We had a Southern woman artist drawn to paint this beautiful canvas.
And from a compositional standpoint, Corrie went into landscapes, kind of an impressionistic view of landscapes. And then she went into more abstraction, into more lyrical compositions. And you can even see that in this room. And I have to give a shout out to Luke. And he had curated this show, and he hung the show, and he did a beautiful job of juxtaposing paintings that work together as a dialogue. So she had her own way of development. And again, to come in and stand in this room and to see what she did, you'll get an impact of her development. I want to mention that she knew Jasper Johns well. They were both from Sumter at the same time. And Jasper would spend time, they knew each other from South Carolina. Jasper would spend time in Edisto, and so Corrie would go down and visit him. And so Corrie was very interested in his printmaking, particularly lithography. And they said that Jasper got out what looked like a cookie sheet and took the wax crayon and started marking on it and doing things. And Corrie was fascinated. And that was her start into lithography. So it's interesting from a historical standpoint, the influences that she had there and so forth. We're running out of time, but I encourage you. We're in Greenville, right out the outskirts of Greenville, South Carolina. We're on a Wade Hampton Boulevard, easily to get, easy parking. So we encourage you to come and explore it yourself. What Luke did is he took the paintings of Corrie and he put them not just in this main gallery, which is full of only Corrie's work, but he put them all around the gallery with other artist works because he felt that it worked well in the dialogue with other artists. And so let's put a woman's work in with everything else.
Absolutely.
Which is a great comment.
Absolutely.
I want to close with this statement that I'll even tell you. It was Roy Fleur, who used to be the director of the Fine Arts Center. When he got the catalog, he sent an email, and he said, "I was taken, more like struck, by her palette, her use of color, Rothko's vibrations energized and captured at a higher magnitude. I keep going back to Jungle 2, Downstream, Fog Night, and Winter. Then, like I love Prince, and the linoleum cuts had an emotional impact on me. I love the idea of Rothko's vibrations. So we welcome you to come and experience this work. Go see the Johnson Collection's work at Wofford College. And we thank you all for coming.